Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're stepping into some very special, very public, and very messy events. You know the ones I'm talking about. Weddings, funerals, baby showers. Those big, landmark moments in life where everyone you know gathers in one room. They're supposed to be our most cherished public rituals. A time for shared joy or solemn remembrance, all conducted with a certain level of decorum and predictability. But here's the thing about getting that many people in one place. You've created a captive audience. And when one person in that room has been pushed past their breaking point, when they're holding onto a secret so monumental it feels like a live grenade, that captive audience can suddenly become a splash zone. Today, we're diving headfirst into stories where the guest of honor, or a guest with a grudge, decides to completely rewrite the script. They take the microphone, they raise their glass, and they turn a celebration into a coliseum. This isn't just about getting even. This is about getting even with a witness list. So grab your popcorn because the ceremonies are about to begin. Our first story is, without a doubt, one of the foundational texts of internet revenge lore. It's a story so perfectly executed, so cold-blooded in its planning, that it's become the gold standard for how to handle the ultimate betrayal. It takes place at what should be the happiest day of a person's life, their wedding reception. It's a setting that's literally built for showcasing love, unity, and a bright future. But for our protagonist, it became the perfect stage to showcase something else entirely, the unvarnished, brutal truth. Let's call our groom Alex. For months, Alex had been living in that blissful, slightly chaotic bubble of wedding planning. He was head over heels in love with his fiancée, let's name her Chloe, and he was thrilled to be marrying her. His best man, Ben, had been his friend since they were kids. They'd gone from scraped knees and video games to navigating college, careers, and now this massive life step. Ben was more than a friend. He was practically a brother. The three of them were a tight-knit trio, always laughing, always together. From the outside, they were the picture of perfect friendship and blossoming love. Alex was on top of the world, convinced he had everything a man could ever want. The final weeks before the wedding were a blur of seating charts, cake tastings, and last-minute suit fittings. The stress was there, sure, but it was happy stress, the kind that comes with building a beautiful life. He felt a deep, unwavering certainty that he was on the right path, with the right person. That certainty was about to be shattered into a million pieces. It happened about a week before the wedding. An anonymous email landed in his inbox. The subject line was simple, just two words: Chloe and Ben. Alex's first instinct was to dismiss it as spam or maybe a prank from one of his college buddies. He almost deleted it without a second thought. But a tiny, cold sliver of curiosity or maybe dread made him click it open. There was no text in the body of the email, just an attachment, a short video file. His heart started to beat a little faster as he double-clicked the file, a media player popping up on his screen. The video was shaky, clearly filmed on a phone by someone trying to be discreet. It was dark, but the location was unmistakable. The back patio of the bar where they'd all been celebrating Ben's birthday just a few nights prior. And then he saw them. Chloe, and Ben, his best man, his brother. They were huddled in a corner thinking they were hidden from view, but they weren't just talking. The video showed them kissing, not a friendly peck, but a deep, passionate, desperate kiss that spoke of familiarity and long-held secrets. Then the video captured their hushed words, the audio grainy but horribly clear. They were talking about their future, about how they couldn't keep doing this, about how after the wedding, things would have to change. They were talking about him. Alex said he felt the world drop out from under him. It wasn't a sudden explosion of rage. It was a terrifying, silent implosion. The air was sucked out of his lungs. The sounds of his office faded into a dull roar. His entire reality, the foundation of his happiness, had just been revealed as a complete and utter lie. Every shared laugh, every "I love you," every knowing glance between his fiancée and his best friend was now recast in a sickening new light. He watched the 30-second clip again, and again, and again. Each viewing was like a fresh stab in the heart, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper and deeper. The shock slowly, very slowly, began to curdle into something else, something cold, hard, and terrifyingly calm. Most people in this situation would have a meltdown. They'd call Chloe, screaming, demanding answers. They'd drive to Ben's house and put a fist through his wall. They would, understandably, cancel the wedding immediately, setting off a logistical and emotional firestorm. But Alex didn't do any of that. As the initial shock subsided, a strange, chilling clarity washed over him. Canceling wasn't enough. A quiet, private implosion would let them off the hook. They would get to control the narrative, paint him as emotional or unstable. They'd whisper to their friends and family that he got cold feet, that he overreacted. They would get to be the victims of a canceled wedding. No, that wasn't justice. They had built this lie together, performed it for months in front of everyone they knew. Alex decided in that moment that the lie deserved to be dismantled just as publicly as it had been performed. He wasn't going to just cancel the wedding. He was going to go through with it. He was going to stand up at the altar, look them both in the eye, and play his part perfectly. And then, at the reception, when all their friends and family were gathered to celebrate their love, he was going to burn their world to the ground. The next week was, by his own account, an out-of-body experience. He had to operate like a spy in his own life, a ghost haunting the final days of his relationship. He had to smile during the rehearsal dinner while his fiancée squeezed his hand under the table, her touch now feeling like a spider crawling on his skin. He had to listen as Ben gave a pre-wedding toast, talking about brotherhood and loyalty, the words ringing so hollow they were almost comical. Alex's mind was a fortress. Inside, he was a storm of grief and rage, meticulously planning his revenge. On the outside, he was the happy, slightly nervous groom. He compartmentalized his emotions with a level of self-control that was almost inhuman. He imagined a small, locked box in his mind where he stored the video, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and he focused every ounce of his energy on the plan. He spoke to the venue coordinator, making a simple request to have the projector and screen, which were already there for a planned slideshow of their childhood photos, set up and ready to be connected to his laptop. A simple, innocuous request that no one would question. The morning of the wedding arrived. Alex stood in front of the mirror adjusting his tie. He looked at his reflection and saw a stranger, a man playing a role. He felt a profound sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. The love and excitement he should have been feeling were replaced by a glacial calm, a sense of purpose. Today was not about a marriage, it was about a reckoning. The ceremony was the hardest part. Walking down the aisle, seeing Chloe in her white dress, radiant and beautiful, was a unique form of psychological torture. She was crying happy tears, and all he could feel was a cold, empty void. He saw her parents beaming in the front row, completely oblivious. He saw Ben standing beside him, giving him a supportive clap on the shoulder, the gesture of a loyal friend. The hypocrisy was so staggering it almost made him laugh. He went through the motions, a perfectly programmed automaton of a groom. He recited his vows, words of love and fidelity that tasted like ash in his mouth, all while looking into the eyes of the woman who had so thoroughly betrayed him. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," he leaned in and gave her a brief, chaste kiss, his skin crawling at the contact. The crowd cheered. The organ swelled. And as they walked back down the aisle together, smiling for the cameras, showered in rice and rose petals, Alex felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The trap was set. The audience was seated. Now all he had to do was wait for the main event. The reception was held in a stunningly beautiful ballroom. Alex had to give them that. They had good taste. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the high, vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, golden light across the room. The tables were adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces and crisp, white linens. A live band played softly in the corner, a gentle melody of jazz standards that provided a sophisticated backdrop to the low hum of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Hundreds of their closest friends and family, people who had watched Alex and Chloe's relationship grow, were there to celebrate their union. It was a scene straight out of a fairy tale. And in the center of it all was Alex, the prince in this twisted story, feeling more like the executioner. They made their grand entrance to thunderous applause. Alex plastered a smile on his face, a carefully constructed mask of joy. He waved to the cheering crowd, holding Chloe's hand. Her hand felt clammy in his, or maybe it was his that was cold. He couldn't tell. He was running on pure adrenaline and a grim, unyielding sense of purpose. He was an actor playing the most difficult role of his life, and the final scene was fast approaching. Then came the first dance. The bandleader announced them and they made their way to the center of the polished dance floor. The opening notes of their song began to play, a song she had chosen, one about eternal love and finding your soulmate. The irony was a physical weight pressing down on his chest. He took her in his arms, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. The room faded away as the spotlight found them. They began to sway to the music just as they had practiced. Chloe looked up at him, her eyes sparkling. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We're finally married. I love you so much, Alex." He looked down at her, into the face he once thought he knew better than his own. He saw the beautiful woman he had fallen in love with, but it was like looking at a photograph of a dead person. The person he loved was gone, replaced by this stranger who could lie to him so completely, so effortlessly. His mind was a maelstrom. Every whispered sweet nothing, every shared dream, every promise she had ever made to him flashed through his memory, now tainted and grotesque. He thought about her on that patio with Ben. He thought about the secret life they had been living behind his back. And as he held her there, swaying to the music, surrounded by their loved ones, he felt a surge of pure, unadulterated ice fill his veins. He had to force himself not to recoil from her touch. He just smiled, a dead, empty smile, and said, "I know." The 3 minutes of that dance felt like an eternity. He was acutely aware of every detail, the scent of her perfume, the weight of her head as she rested it on his shoulder, the rhythmic beat of the music. And through it all, the video played on a loop in the locked box in his mind. Click, play, rewind, click, play, rewind. When the song finally ended, the room erupted in applause again. He let her go, relieved to break the physical contact. They sat at the head table, flanked by their parents and the wedding party, with Ben, the treacherous best man, right beside him. The meal was served, but Alex couldn't eat. He just pushed the food around his plate, his stomach a tight knot of anxiety and anticipation. The speeches began. Chloe's father went first, giving a tearful, heartfelt speech about his beautiful daughter and welcoming Alex into the family as the son he never had. Alex stood and hugged him, the man's genuine affection a fresh twist of the knife. The maid of honor followed, sharing funny anecdotes from their college years. The whole time, Alex could feel Ben shifting nervously beside him. Perhaps he thought he'd gotten away with it. Perhaps he was just nervous about his own upcoming speech. Finally, the clinking of a glass signaled it was Alex's turn. This was it, the moment of truth. Time seemed to slow down as he pushed his chair back and stood up. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to him. He walked calmly to the microphone set up on the dance floor, his footsteps echoing slightly in the vast room. He could feel Chloe's adoring gaze on his back. He could feel Ben's expectant silence. He reached the mic and took a deep, steadying breath. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice surprisingly clear and strong. "I just want to start by thanking you all for coming here today to celebrate with us. It means the world to see so many people we love in one room." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. He looked around the room, making eye contact with a few smiling faces. He then turned his gaze to the head table, looking directly at his new wife and his best man. Chloe was beaming, a perfect picture of bridal bliss. Ben gave him a small, encouraging nod. "I'm supposed to give a toast to my new bride, to our future," Alex continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. "But I think, before we do that, it's important to be honest, and I've learned a lot about honesty in the past week." A few confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Chloe's smile faltered slightly, replaced by a look of faint confusion. Alex pressed on. "You see, instead of the traditional slideshow of our childhood photos, I have something else I'd like to share. A short video clip that I think really captures the passion of this occasion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, black remote. I'm afraid we're not going to have a real reception today. He aimed the remote at the projector and pressed the button. The large white screen behind the head table, which had been displaying their wedding monogram, flickered and went black. The room was utterly silent now, thick with confusion and a dawning sense of dread. And then the video started. It was his video, the shaky, grainy phone footage now magnified 10 feet high for everyone to see. There on the big screen was Chloe. His wife in her wedding dress was now projected for all to see, locked in a passionate embrace with Ben, his best man. The hushed, damning audio filled the silent ballroom, echoing off the high ceilings. Can't keep doing this. After the wedding. The reaction was instantaneous and seismic. A collective, audible gasp swept through the room, a wave of pure shock. Someone dropped a fork, the clatter deafening in the silence. Chloe's mother let out a small, strangled scream. Alex didn't watch the screen. He watched them. He saw Chloe's face collapse. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth fell open in a silent O of horror, and her eyes, wide with panic, darted from the screen to Alex, then to her parents, who were staring at her with expressions of utter devastation. And Ben looked like he had been turned to stone. His face was a mask of waxy, pale shock, his eyes locked on the screen, on his own betrayal playing out for the world to see. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own execution. The 30-second video felt like a lifetime. When it ended, the screen went black, plunging the room back into a stunned, horrified silence. Alex calmly stepped back up to the microphone. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. His voice was chillingly devoid of emotion. "Our financial gifts will be used by me to cover my half of the wedding costs," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "The rest, and I mean every single penny, will be used for my honeymoon, which I'll be taking alone in 2 days." He then looked directly at the crumbling figures of Chloe and Ben. "As for the marriage, it's over. The annulment papers have been filed." He placed the microphone carefully back in its stand. He took one last look at the scene of utter devastation he had created. Chloe was openly sobbing, her face buried in her hands. Her father was on his feet, his face purple with rage, shouting something incomprehensible at her. Ben's parents were looking at their son with a mixture of shame and fury. Guests were standing up, whispering, pointing. The fairy tale had become a public crucifixion. Without another word, Alex turned his back on the chaos, on the wreckage of his former life, and walked. He walked past the shocked faces of his friends, past the weeping bride, past the disgraced best man, and out of the ballroom doors into the cool, quiet night. He didn't run. He walked with the steady, unburdened gait of a man who had just excised a cancer from his life in the most public, most brutal, and most definitive way imaginable. He was finally free. "Okay, let's just take a collective breath here. Wow, the sheer, unmitigated, ice-cold audacity of that move is something to behold. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a meticulously planned, flawlessly executed character assassination. And honestly, I'm struggling to find a single reason to fault him. What makes this revenge so potent, so utterly devastating, is that the punishment was tailored perfectly to the crime. Chloe and Ben's betrayal wasn't just a private act. They performed their loyalty and love in public, for months, in front of everyone they knew. They smiled at family gatherings, they went out for drinks, they played the roles of loving fiancé and loyal best friend. It was a long-running play, and Alex was the only one who didn't have the script. So when he found out, he didn't just cancel the show. He ripped down the entire theater during the final act. He made the humiliation as public as their deception had been. It's a brutal reminder that when you build your happiness on a foundation of lies, you shouldn't be surprised when the whole thing comes crashing down for everyone to see. Now, from a lie that blew up on day one of a marriage, we turn to a story about a lie that was allowed to fester and grow over many months. A lie so insidious it rewrote a couple's entire history and threatened to poison a man's future. This isn't about a single moment of infidelity caught on camera. This is about a slow, creeping gaslighting campaign that culminates not at a wedding, but at a baby shower, an event that is supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of innocent joy and happy anticipation. But for our next protagonist, it was the perfect venue to deliver a truth bomb that was 9 months in the making. Let's call the protagonist of this story Mark. Mark and his wife, Jessica, had what most people would consider a very good marriage. They were deeply in love, they were best friends, and they shared the same vision for the future. But there was one persistent, quiet heartbreak that shadowed their lives. They had been trying for a baby for years with no success. It was a grueling, emotionally draining cycle of hope and disappointment that had put a significant strain on their relationship, but they were determined to face it together. After countless doctors' visits and tests for Jessica all came back normal, the focus finally turned to Mark. He remembers the day of his appointment with a heavy sense of dread. He went alone, telling Jessica it was just a formality. A few weeks later, she told him the results had come in. She sat him down on the sofa, her expression a careful mixture of sorrow and support. She took his hand and told him the news, her voice soft and pitying. The doctor had called her, she said, and explained the results. It was him. He had a 0 sperm count. He was, for all intents and purposes, sterile. The word sterile hit Mark like a physical blow. It was a label, a brand, a final crushing verdict on his manhood and his dreams of fatherhood. He felt a profound, hollowing shame. It was as if a fundamental part of his identity had been scooped out, leaving a gaping void. He felt broken, defective. He spiraled into a quiet depression, and Jessica played the part of the supportive, loving wife perfectly. She held him when he cried. She reassured him that it didn't change how much she loved him, that they would find another way to be a family. But whenever he brought up adoption or other alternatives, she would gently steer the conversation away, saying it was too soon to think about that they needed time to heal. Life went on, and they settled into a new, sad normal. The dream of a biological child was packed away, a painful ghost in their happy home. Then, about 6 months later, the impossible happened. Jessica came to him one evening, her face pale, her hands trembling. She was holding a pregnancy test, and it was positive. Mark's first reaction wasn't suspicion. It was sheer, unadulterated confusion. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile two completely contradictory facts. "But that's not possible," he stammered. "The doctor, you said I was sterile." This was the moment Jessica's deception went from a simple lie to a masterful campaign of psychological manipulation. She burst into tears, but they were tears of joy. "I know," she cried, throwing her arms around him. "It's a miracle. It must be a 1 in a million chance. The doctors were wrong. Oh, Mark, we're having a baby." His confusion remained, a nagging, logical question mark in a sea of overwhelming emotion. But how could he question a miracle? How could he look at his weeping, overjoyed wife and cast doubt on what she saw as a gift from God? When he tried to gently suggest that maybe they should talk to the doctor and understand what happened, she would get defensive. "Why can't you just be happy?" she'd ask, her voice laced with hurt. "Are you saying you don't want this baby? Are you accusing me of something?" She masterfully twisted his rational skepticism into an attack on her character, on their love, on their unborn child. He was cornered. So he backed down. He allowed himself to be swept up in the narrative she was creating. He chose to believe in the miracle. But the true cruelty of her lie was yet to come. She didn't keep his condition a secret. In fact, she did the opposite. She weaponized it, turning it into the centerpiece of their story. To her friends, to her family, to his family, she spun a romantic, faith-affirming tale. "We were devastated," she would say, clutching Mark's hand at family dinners. "The doctors told us it was impossible, that my poor, sweet husband was sterile. We had lost all hope. But our love was so strong, our faith so deep, that God gave us a miracle." And just like that, Mark's deepest, most painful source of shame was transformed into a public spectacle. He became a character in his wife's fairy tale, the sterile husband, the beneficiary of a miracle he didn't understand. He saw the pitying looks from his friends, the sad smiles from his own mother. He endured the condescending pats on the back from his father-in-law. He was trapped in a web of her creation. He couldn't challenge the story without looking like an ungrateful, suspicious monster who was questioning his wife's fidelity and God's will. He was utterly, completely alone, living inside a lie that was being celebrated by everyone he knew. The months of the pregnancy were a slow, grinding torture for him. He played the part of the doting father-to-be, rubbing her belly, assembling the crib, painting the nursery. But inside, the seed of doubt, once planted, was growing into a thorny vine of resentment and suspicion. The final straw came when he overheard her on the phone with her sister. Jessica was laughing, and he heard her say, "He was so sad about the whole sterile thing, but I think it made the miracle story so much more believable, don't you?" The casual cruelty of that sentence, the admission that she was not just lying but actively crafting a narrative using his pain as a plot device, broke something inside him. The love he had for her curdled into something cold and hard. The miracle story was no longer just a lie. It was a cage, and he was finally ready to break out of it. His plan was methodical, born of months of quiet suffering. First, he scheduled an appointment with a different fertility clinic in a neighboring city, paying in cash. The results came back a week later, confirming what he had begun to suspect in his gut. He was perfectly healthy. His fertility was completely normal. The first lie was exposed. The second step was harder. He found a company online that performed non-invasive prenatal paternity tests using a blood sample from the mother. One day, while Jessica was in the shower, he pricked his own finger for a DNA sample, and he carefully collected some of her stray hairs from her hairbrush. It felt like a terrible violation, but he knew it was the only way to get the definitive truth. He sent the samples off and waited. The email with the results arrived 2 weeks before the baby shower. His heart hammered against his ribs as he clicked open the attached PDF file. He scrolled past the medical jargon, his eyes searching for the one sentence that would either restore his world or shatter it completely. And then he saw it. Under the heading Probability of Paternity, the clinical black and white text read, 0%. The screen blurred. He felt no rage, no shock, not even sadness. All he felt was a profound, terrifying emptiness. The woman he loved, the life they had built, the child he had allowed himself to get excited about, it was all a lie built on his pain, his trust, and his love. And in that moment of cold, empty clarity, he knew what he had to do. A private confrontation would never be enough. She had made his humiliation a public story. He would make the truth a public spectacle. And her baby shower, the grand celebration of her magnificent lie, would be the perfect stage. He spent the next 2 weeks preparing. He went to a professional printing shop and had the DNA results blown up and mounted on a piece of foam core, like a science fair project. He contacted his lawyer and had divorce papers drawn up, requesting them to be bound in a neat, professional-looking folder. He wrapped these 2 items together in a large, flat box, using pastel blue wrapping paper covered in pictures of teddy bears and rattles. The day of the baby shower arrived. The backyard of Jessica's parents' house had been transformed into a pastel wonderland. Blue and white balloons floated everywhere, streamers hung from the trees, and a banner reading "Welcome Baby Miller" was stretched across the patio. The yard was filled with dozens of friends and family from both sides, all laughing, eating cake, and celebrating the miracle baby. Mark moved through the party like a ghost, a polite smile fixed on his face. He accepted congratulations, he made small talk, he played the part of the proud, happy father-to-be one last time. He watched Jessica, radiant in a blue maternity dress, holding court in the center of it all. She was glowing, accepting gifts and adoration, the undisputed queen of this fraudulent kingdom. He felt 1,000,000 miles away from all of it, a detached observer counting down the seconds to detonation. Finally, it was time for the main event, the opening of the presents. Jessica was seated in a large wicker chair, a makeshift throne surrounded by a mountain of brightly wrapped gifts. Her mother handed her the presents one by one, and Jessica would ooh and ah over the tiny onesies, the stuffed animals, the baby monitors. After nearly an hour, only one gift was left. It was the large, flat box from Mark. "Ooh, the grand finale," her mother announced, handing the box to Jessica. "What did your wonderful husband get for our little miracle?" Jessica beamed at Mark, a loving, conspiratorial smile that made his stomach turn. "I can't wait to see," she said, her voice full of excitement. She placed the box on her lap and began to tear away the cheerful wrapping paper. She lifted the lid and pulled out the first item, the large foam core board. She stared at it, her head tilted in confusion. The guests craned their necks, trying to see what it was. It looked like some kind of chart or official document. Jessica's smile faltered. "Honey," she said, her voice hesitant, "what is this?" Mark, who had positioned himself to be standing near her, stepped forward. His voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it was so calm and clear that it cut through all the background chatter, silencing the entire party. "That, Jessica," he said, pointing to the board, "is a prenatal paternity test. You see the part at the bottom there, the part that says probability of paternity, 0%. That means I'm not the father." A wave of pure, uncomprehending silence washed over the 50 guests. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves in the trees. Jessica's face went completely white, her eyes wide with a dawning, panicked horror. She looked from the board to his face, her mouth opening and closing but no words coming out. "But don't worry," Mark continued in that same, chillingly calm voice. "I got you a second gift. It's in the box." Her hands shaking, she fumbled inside the box and her fingers closed around the professionally bound folder. She pulled it out and stared at the cover sheet. "Divorce petition." The dam of silence broke. Jessica let out a choked, guttural sob. Her mother shrieked, "What is the meaning of this?" Mark's own mother, who had been smiling moments before, looked like she was about to faint. Mark looked down at his wife, at the woman who had used his deepest insecurities to build a world of lies, and he felt nothing. "Our marriage is over," he said, his voice flat and final. "My lawyer will be in contact with yours." And with that, he turned and walked away. He didn't look back as the party imploded behind him. He didn't need to see the chaos, the screaming, the accusations, the families turning on each other. He just walked through the stunned, parting crowd of guests, out the side gate, and down the street to his car. The banner welcoming the baby he now knew wasn't as fluttered in the breeze behind him. The sound of his wife's hysterical crying faded as he got in his car and drove away, leaving the beautiful, pastel-colored wreckage of his old life behind him for good. Gem 2 Story Rewrite. Custom Gem. Show thinking. Good Lord. If the last story was a public execution via projector screen, this one was a quiet, slow-motion assassination with paper and ink. The sheer, diabolical brilliance of Jessica's lie is what makes this story so chilling. She didn't just cheat. She constructed an entire alternate reality and forced Mark to live in it. She preemptively neutralized any suspicion by creating a medical fact, his sterility, that made her pregnancy an untouchable, unquestionable miracle. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She took his deepest, most personal sense of inadequacy, a feeling she invented for him, and made it the cornerstone of a public fairy tale. He wasn't just a victim of infidelity, he was a prisoner of her narrative. And that's why his revenge, as brutal as it was, feels so perfectly, poetically just. He didn't just want to expose her cheating. He needed to dismantle the entire false reality she had built. A quiet divorce wouldn't do it. A private confrontation would have allowed her to control the story, to paint him as bitter or crazy. No, the lie was born and nurtured in the public eye, among their friends and family, so the truth had to be delivered to that same audience. And what better stage than the baby shower? An event that is literally the climax of her 9-month-long lie. He walked into the heart of her kingdom, into the celebration of her grand deception, and he didn't just tear down the throne. He presented irrefutable, scientific proof that the entire kingdom was fraudulent. He turned the celebration of a new life into the funeral for their marriage, and he did it with a smile on his face. So far, we've seen revenge served hot at events that are supposed to be the happiest moments of our lives. But what happens when the person who wronged you most, the one who inflicted the deepest cuts, is already gone? What happens when you're standing in a room full of mourners, listening to people eulogize a saint who you, and only you, knew was a monster? Our next story takes us to the somber, hushed environment of a funeral, where the final speech is not one of remembrance, but of reckoning. This isn't about exposing a secret. It's about correcting a legacy, no matter how many people it destroys in the process. Let's call our narrator Ethan. The story begins on a gray, drizzly Tuesday morning at a funeral home. The air is thick with the cloying scent of lilies and stale coffee. Soft, somber organ music drifts from hidden speakers. Ethan is sitting in a hard, wooden pew, staring at the ornate, closed casket at the front of the room. Inside is his grandmother, Alina. To hear the rest of the family tell it, the world has just lost a titan, a matriarch, a pillar of the church and the community. His aunts and uncles are weeping quietly. His cousins are sharing fond, whispered memories of her famous apple pie and her warm hugs. His own mother is beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, completely grief-stricken. They are mourning a saint, but Ethan is not. Ethan is sitting in a cold, quiet rage because the woman they are all mourning is a complete work of fiction. The Alina he knew was not a saint. She was a tyrant, a manipulator, a cruel, abusive woman who hid her black heart behind a carefully constructed facade of grandmotherly sweetness. His entire childhood was a minefield of her psychological warfare. She was a master of the backhanded compliment that could gut you with a smile. "Oh, Ethan, you tried so hard on this school project," she'd say, patting his head. "It's a shame your cousin David is just naturally gifted." She would give his siblings and cousins money for treats right in front of him, and when he'd ask why he didn't get any, she'd lean in and whisper, "Because you're a disappointment, and disappointments don't get rewards." Her cruelty was surgical. It was always done in private, away from the eyes of other adults. She knew exactly how to inflict the maximum amount of pain with no witnesses. He remembers one summer afternoon when he was 10. He had accidentally spilled a glass of lemonade on her pristine white carpet. In front of his parents, she was all forgiveness. "Oh, accidents happen, sweetheart, don't you worry one bit." But the moment his parents left the room, her face transformed. Her smile vanished, replaced by a venomous sneer. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his bicep like claws, and dragged him to the stain. "You are a clumsy, worthless little boy," she hissed, her face inches from his. "You will spend the rest of the day on your hands and knees scrubbing this until it's gone. And if I see one single spot, I will make you lick it clean." He spent the next 4 hours scrubbing, his knees raw and his eyes burning with tears of shame and frustration, while the sounds of his cousins playing outside drifted in through the open window. She pitted family members against each other with the skill of a master strategist, manufacturing slights and whispering poison into the right ears to maintain her position as the family's center of gravity. And her prejudice was just as ugly as her personal cruelty. He vividly remembers being at a family barbecue when a neighboring family, who were black, walked by on the sidewalk. His grandmother leaned over to him, a conspiratorial smile on her face, and whispered a string of racial slurs so vile, so hateful, that it made him feel sick to his stomach, even as a child who didn't fully understand the words. This was the real Alina, a petty, racist, abusive monster who had spent 80 years perfecting her disguise as a lovely, church-going old woman. And now, here he was, at her funeral, being forced to listen to the grand lie of her life. He listened as his uncle gave a tearful eulogy, talking about her boundless generosity. Ethan thought about the time she gifted him a used, broken bicycle for his birthday while giving his cousin a brand new video game console, explaining that some children just deserve more. He listened as his aunt spoke of her deep and abiding faith. Ethan thought of how she used scripture as a weapon, twisting verses to justify her cruelty and condemn others. With every syrupy tribute, every sanitized memory, the rage in his chest grew hotter. It was an insult to him. It was an insult to the scared, lonely little boy he had been, the boy she had taken such pleasure in tormenting. He had no intention of speaking. He was just going to endure this farce, get through the burial, and then go home and try to forget this woman ever existed. But then, during a lull in the speeches, his mother leaned over to him, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Ethan, honey," she whispered, squeezing his hand. "No one has spoken from the grandchildren's generation. You were always so quiet around her, but I know you spent so much time with her. I know how much you loved her. Would you please go up and say a few words? It would mean so much to everyone." He looked at his mother's face, at her genuine, heartbreakingly naive belief in her own mother's goodness, and something inside him snapped. "I know how much you loved her." The words were a gut punch. She had no idea. None of them had any idea. They had all been so thoroughly fooled by the performance that they had never bothered to look behind the curtain. And in that moment he made a decision. It was a cold, hard, and terrifying decision, but it felt like the only true thing he could do. His mother was asking him to go up and contribute another lie to the pile, to add another coat of varnish to the saintly portrait of a demon. He couldn't do it, but he could speak. Oh yes, he would speak. He would stand up in front of all of them, in front of the casket containing the woman who had terrorized him, and he would finally, for the first and last time, tell the truth about her. He gave his mother's hand a gentle squeeze. "You're right," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I should say something." He stood up, his legs feeling a little shaky. The eyes of the congregation turned to him. He saw looks of gentle encouragement, of sad sympathy. They were expecting a few heartfelt, tearful sentences from a grieving grandson. They had no idea they were about to witness the demolition of a legacy. He walked slowly to the lectern at the front of the chapel, his heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat against his ribs. He stood behind the podium, looking out at the sea of expectant faces. His family, his grandmother's friends from church, her neighbors. He took a deep breath, clutching the sides of the lectern to steady his hands, and began to speak. "Good morning," he started, his voice a little softer than he intended, a slight tremor running through it. "We are here today to remember my grandmother, Alina, to share our memories of her and the impact she had on our lives." He paused, letting the generic funereal words settle over the room. He could see his mother give him a small, watery smile of encouragement. The congregation was settled, receptive, ready for the familiar cadence of grief and remembrance. "I look out at all of you," he continued, gripping the lectern, "and I see a room full of people who were touched by my grandmother. And I feel it's my duty as her grandson to make sure that today we are remembering the real woman, the whole person. Because I've been sitting here listening to the stories about her kindness, her generosity, her faith, and I have to be honest, I don't recognize the woman being described." A few heads tilted. A confused murmur rippled through the first few pews. His mother's smile froze on her face. Ethan's voice grew stronger now, shedding the tremor and taking on a cold, hard clarity. "My Uncle Robert just gave a beautiful speech about Alina's boundless generosity. I remember that generosity well," he said, his eyes finding his uncle's in the crowd. "I remember it most clearly on my 12th birthday. That was the year she gave my cousin Mark a brand new PlayStation, and she gave me a rusted, second-hand bicycle that she had pulled from a neighbor's trash heap. When I asked her why, she leaned in close and whispered so no one else could hear, 'Because disappointments don't deserve new things.' That was her generosity." The murmuring grew louder. His uncle's face went from sad and nostalgic to flushed and angry. Ethan continued, his pace deliberate, like a prosecutor laying out his case. "My Aunt Carol spoke of her famous kindness and her warm, forgiving heart. I, too, was a recipient of that kindness," he went on, his voice dripping with ice. "I was 10 years old and I accidentally spilled a glass of lemonade in her living room. In front of my parents, she was all smiles and forgiveness. But the moment they were gone, she grabbed my arm so hard it left bruises for a week, and she told me, and I quote, 'You are a clumsy, worthless little boy. You will scrub this floor until it's gone, and if I see one spot, I will make you lick it clean.' I spent 4 hours on my hands and knees while she sat in her armchair, watching me cry. That was her kindness. His mother let out a small, horrified gasp. People were openly staring now, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Her church friends looked utterly scandalized. And her faith, Ethan said, his voice rising slightly. Oh, we must not forget her deep and abiding faith. The faith that led her to teach me that our neighbors, the Watsons, a lovely family who always brought us cookies at Christmas, were somehow lesser people because they were black. The faith that allowed her to use the most vile, hateful, racist language I have ever heard in my life, and then go to church on Sunday and sing hymns about loving thy neighbor. That was her faith. The room was in an uproar now. His uncle was on his feet, his face purple. "That's enough," he yelled. "You're desecrating her memory." Ethan ignored him, his eyes sweeping across the congregation, across his family's horrified faces. "You are all here today mourning a fictional character," he declared, his voice ringing with the conviction of years of silenced truth. "You're mourning the sweet, gentle, pie-baking matriarch that she pretended to be. But that woman never existed. The real Alina was a cruel, manipulative, racist bully who took pleasure in the quiet suffering of a lonely little boy. She was not a pillar of this family. She was the rot at its core, expertly turning us against one another to satisfy her own ego." He leaned forward into the microphone, his voice dropping to a low, intense conclusion. "So you go ahead and mourn. You cry for the woman from your sanitized memories. You pray for the soul of the saint you invented, but I will not. I will not stand here and eulogize my abuser. I will not pretend to miss a moment of her toxic presence in my life. For me, this day is not about grief. It is about liberation. I am not mourning a loss. I am celebrating my freedom." He paused, letting his final words hang in the dead, electrified silence of the room. "Good riddance," he said softly. Then he simply stepped back from the lectern. The silence held for a beat and then shattered. His mother burst into loud, hysterical sobs. His uncle lunged toward the front of the chapel, shouting obscenities at him. The pastor, looking pale and horrified, rushed to the microphone, stammering about peace and respect. But Ethan didn't see or hear any of it. He walked down the side aisle, his gaze fixed on the double doors at the back of the room. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked, pushing the doors open and stepping out into the cold, clean, drizzly air, leaving the inferno of truth to burn behind him. The lie of Saint Alina was dead, and he was the one who had finally put it in the ground. This one hits differently, doesn't it? The stakes feel higher somehow, more personal. This isn't about infidelity. It's about the deep, foundational trauma of a childhood spent under the thumb of an abuser. And it's about the suffocating conspiracy of silence that so often surrounds that kind of abuse in a family. The family didn't just forget Alina's cruelty. They actively chose to construct a false history, and they expected Ethan to co-sign it. The question, of course, is, was a funeral the right place for this? And my gut reaction is to say no. It's disrespectful to the other mourners. It's a violation of a solemn occasion. But the more you think about it, the more you realize it was the only place he could have done it. A funeral is a public forum for defining a person's legacy. Everyone was gathered for the express purpose of cementing the myth of Saint Alina into the official family record. It was his one and only chance to object. It was the ultimate, real-life speak now or forever hold your peace moment. To stay silent would have been a betrayal of himself, of the child he was. It would have meant letting the abuser win, even in death. What he did was an act of profound defiance. He didn't just desecrate a memory. He corrected the historical record in front of the only audience that mattered. It probably shattered his family, but for him, it was clearly the sound of chains breaking. From a truth that shattered a somber memory, we return now to the scene of so much of this chaos, a wedding reception. But this time, the dynamics are even more twisted. Our protagonist isn't the groom discovering a fresh betrayal. No, he's the ex-husband, and he has been invited by his cheating ex-wife and his treacherous ex-best friend to attend their wedding. As if that weren't insulting enough, they ask him to give a toast, to stand up in front of everyone and give his public blessing, to show there are no hard feelings. He agrees, and he delivers a performance so masterful, so diabolical in its construction, it makes our first story look like child's play. Let's call our protagonist Daniel. 2 years ago, Daniel's life had imploded in the most cliché and devastating way possible. He came home early from a business trip to find his wife, Olivia, in their bed with his best friend since kindergarten, Liam. The aftermath was a brutal, soul-crushing divorce that left him a hollowed-out shell of the man he once was. He'd spent the last 2 years painstakingly putting the pieces of his life back together, focusing on his career, hitting the gym, and slowly, cautiously, learning to trust again. He was finally getting to a place where he could go a whole day without thinking about them. And then, the invitation arrived. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with elegant, gold-embossed calligraphy. Olivia and Liam were getting married. The invitation itself was a fresh wave of nausea, a formal announcement of their victory and his defeat. He stared at it for a long time, the sharp edges of the paper digging into his fingers. His first impulse was to set it on fire. His second was to throw it in the trash. But he ended up just leaving it on his counter, a monument to their staggering audacity. A few days later, they called him, together, on speakerphone. The cheerful confidence in their voices was unnerving. They told him they knew the invitation might have been a shock, but they really, truly wanted him to be there. "It would mean so much to us, Daniel," Olivia said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet sincerity. "It would show everyone that we've all healed, that we've all moved on. It would be closure." Liam chimed in. "Yeah, mate, we want to do this the right way. No more drama, just a clean slate for everyone." Daniel was speechless. The sheer, weapons-grade narcissism of the request was breathtaking. They didn't just want to be happy. They wanted him to be a smiling prop in the stage play of their happiness. They wanted his public stamp of approval on their betrayal. It was an insult so profound, it looped all the way back around to being morbidly fascinating. And as he stood there, phone pressed to his ear, listening to the two people who had destroyed his world talk about closure, a tiny, cold, and brilliant idea began to form in the back of his mind. An idea so audacious, it made their own request seem quaint. Most people would have unleashed a torrent of well-deserved fury. They would have screamed, cursed, and slammed the phone down. Daniel did the opposite. He took a slow breath, summoned every ounce of his acting ability, and made his voice sound weary, resigned, and maybe even a little noble. "You know what?" he said, a note of feigned sadness in his tone. "You're right. Life's too short to hold on to all this anger." He paused for effect. "Okay, I'll come to the wedding." He could almost hear their relieved smiles through the phone, but they weren't done. "That's amazing, Daniel, thank you," Olivia gushed. "And we had one other small idea. We were thinking, and this might be crazy, but we thought it would be so powerful if you would give a toast at the reception. You know, just to really show everyone there are no hard feelings." There it was, the final, unbelievable insult. They weren't just asking him to witness their union, they were asking him to bless it, to stand up and publicly absolve them of their sins. And in that moment, Daniel's quiet idea blossomed into a full-blown, meticulously detailed plan for revenge. This was no longer an insult. This was an opportunity, a gilded, engraved invitation to burn their new life to the ground before it even began. "A toast," he repeated slowly, as if considering it. "Wow," he let the silence stretch out, making them sweat. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think I can do that for old time's sake." They were ecstatic. They had got everything they wanted. Their guilt was assuaged. Their public image was secure. The magnanimous, forgiving ex-husband would be there to validate their love story. They had no idea they had just handed a lit match to an arsonist and invited him into a house made of gasoline-soaked rags. The final piece of his plan fell into place a week before the wedding. Olivia called him, alone this time. She sounded nervous, jittery. She said she was having second thoughts, not about Liam, of course, but about everything, about how they'd hurt him. She asked if they could meet for a drink just to talk one last time to really clear the air before she walked down the aisle. Daniel knew exactly what this was. A final, selfish attempt to soothe her own conscience. He agreed immediately. They met at a quiet, dimly lit hotel bar. She cried. She apologized. She told him a part of her would always love him. It was a textbook performance of a woman trying to have her cake and eat it too. Daniel played his part, nodding, listening, being the understanding, gentle man she remembered. One drink led to two. She touched his hand. She said she was confused. He didn't push. He didn't have to. She led him upstairs to her room. And as he lay there with the woman who had betrayed him, the woman who was about to marry his former best friend, he felt no passion, no rekindled love, no weakness. He felt only the cold, methodical satisfaction of a general moving his final piece into position. The next morning, before she woke up, he propped his phone up on the dresser, aimed it at the bed, and quietly started a video recording. He woke her with a kiss, and they were intimate one last time. He had his ammunition. The wedding day was a surreal masterpiece of passive aggression. Daniel walked into the lavishly decorated country club feeling like an anthropologist studying a strange and deeply dysfunctional tribe. He saw the whispers and the pointed stares from guests who knew the whole sordid story. He graciously accepted the awkward, pitying hugs from Olivia's parents. He even shook hands with Liam's father, who couldn't quite meet his eye. He watched the ceremony from a back row pew, a placid, unreadable smile on his face. He watched as Olivia, the woman he had a video of on his phone, walked down the aisle in a virginal white dress. He watched as Liam, the man who had stabbed him in the back, wept openly at the sight of her. He watched them exchange sacred vows of fidelity and trust, and the sheer, staggering hypocrisy of it all was almost beautiful in its perfection. The reception was even better. The food was exquisite, the champagne was flowing, and the atmosphere was thick with a tense, unspoken drama that centered entirely on him. He was the ghost at the feast, and everyone was waiting to see if he would rattle his chains. When the DJ announced it was time for the toasts, a palpable hush fell over the room. The new best man gave a clumsy, awkward speech. The maid of honor cried a little too much, and then the DJ called his name. And now, a very special toast from a very dear friend of the bride and groom, Daniel. Daniel stood up and calmly walked to the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, and then he turned his gaze to the head table. Olivia and Liam were beaming at him, their faces shining with smug self-satisfaction. They looked so proud of themselves, so proud of their modern, enlightened arrangement. "Hello, everyone," he began, his voice warm and steady, laced with a gentle, melancholic sincerity. "I have to admit, when Olivia and Liam asked me to speak tonight, I was at a loss for words. What can you say on a day like this?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air. "But as I stand here, looking at the two of them, I realize what you say is the truth. And the truth is that life is messy. It's complicated. And sometimes the path to true happiness is winding and difficult, and people get hurt along the way." He looked directly at them, his eyes soft with what looked like profound understanding. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend that the last couple of years haven't been hard. They have. But bitterness is a poison you drink yourself. And I've chosen to let it go. I've chosen to forgive." At the head table, Olivia's eyes filled with tears. She clutched Liam's hand, her expression one of pure, cathartic relief. Several guests were openly dabbing at their eyes. He had them. They were completely mesmerized. "Seeing you two together tonight," he continued, his voice thick with emotion, "I see that what you have is real, and I wish you from the bottom of my heart all the happiness and joy that you both so truly, truly deserve. You have my blessing." He raised his glass. "So I'd like to propose a toast to love, to forgiveness, to new beginnings, and a toast to Sarah and Tom, to a love that is so powerful, so all-consuming." He paused, locking eyes with Olivia, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "That it even brought Olivia back to my hotel room last Tuesday night." Pin-drop silence. The smiles on Olivia and Liam's faces didn't just freeze, they shattered. 150 guests stopped breathing at the exact same moment. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop from across the room. Before anyone could react, Daniel added the finishing touch, holding his phone up just slightly. "And a special toast to the wonders of modern technology," he said, his voice now dripping with venom, "which allows us to capture those precious, intimate memories on video, just so we never ever forget." He didn't wait for the explosion. He didn't need to see the aftermath. He just placed the microphone gently back in its stand, gave the horrified bride and the apoplectic groom a final, jaunty little nod, and turned around. He walked calmly and deliberately out of the ballroom, the first wave of a tsunami of shouting, screaming, and crying crashing at his back. The public absolution they had so desperately craved had just become their public execution. And Daniel, for the first time in 2 years, felt completely and utterly free. Okay, let's just pour one out for whatever was left of that wedding reception. Daniel's revenge is a contender for the pettiest, most psychologically devastating move we've discussed today. It operates on a level of Machiavellian genius that is both terrifying and, let's be honest, deeply impressive. Unlike the first story, where the groom was a victim exposing a crime he had just discovered, Daniel was a man who had already been through the war, healed his wounds, and then willingly walked back onto the battlefield to plant a bomb. The true cruelty wasn't just exposing that he'd slept with Olivia. It was the timing. He waited until after they had said their vows. He waited until after he had masterfully lulled them into a state of tearful, smug security with his speech on forgiveness. He gave them the public absolution they so desperately craved, let them bask in it for a few perfect, shining moments, and then snatched it away, replacing it with a humiliation so absolute, so permanent, it would stain every memory of their wedding day for the rest of their lives. He didn't just ruin their reception. He planted a seed of doubt and betrayal that would poison the very root of their marriage. Liam will never, ever be able to look at his wife without thinking of that toast. That is a wound that doesn't heal, and it all happened because they had the audacity to ask him to show there are no hard feelings. Well, he showed them. Our stories so far have been about grand, explosive declarations, videos playing, documents revealed, bombshell announcements dropped like grenades. But our final story is a masterclass in a different kind of warfare. It's a revenge that unfolds not with a shout, but with a whisper. It's a weapon made not of hard evidence, but of carefully chosen words and shared secrets that, once spoken aloud in a quiet room, could never be unheard. It's about a man who, after years of enduring homophobic abuse from his older brother, decides to rewrite the script of his brother's perfect, traditional wedding, with the one truth his brother never wanted the world to know. Our protagonist is Michael. Growing up, Michael had always been the target of his older brother, Greg. Greg was the family's golden boy, captain of the football team, popular, charismatic, and aggressively, performatively straight. And he made sure Michael, who was quiet, artistic, and gay, never forgot his place in the family hierarchy. The abuse was rarely physical. It was a slow, steady drip of psychological poison. It was the constant, casual use of homophobic slurs as jokes at the dinner table. It was the way Greg would loudly talk about his weekend conquests whenever Michael brought a male friend home. It was the endless stream of condescending remarks, the belittling of his interests, the constant, unspoken message that Michael was somehow lesser, weaker, and fundamentally wrong. The rest of the family just brushed it off as boys being boys, leaving Michael to navigate this minefield of quiet cruelty alone. But here is the beautiful, terrible irony that lay hidden beneath the surface of their entire relationship. For the past 4 years, Michael had been in a secret, serious relationship with the one person Greg trusted and admired most in the world, his best friend and future best man, Alex. Alex was on the same football team. He was part of Greg's popular crowd, and he played the part of the loyal, straight wingman to perfection. But in stolen moments, late-night texts, quiet road trips, guys' weekends that were a cover for something much deeper, Alex and Michael had built a life together, A life lived entirely in the shadows, terrified of what would happen if Greg ever found out. The strain of this double life was immense, especially on Alex, who was constantly forced to laugh along with Greg's homophobic jokes, each one a small stab at the heart of the man he truly loved. They were reaching a breaking point. They knew they couldn't hide forever. Then came the invitation. Greg was getting married to his high school sweetheart, a woman as conventionally perfect as he was. And Greg, in a grand gesture of what he saw as magnanimous brotherly love, asked Michael to give a speech at the wedding. "It'll be good," Greg had said with a condescending slap on the back. "Show everyone we're all one big, happy family, right?" The request was, for Michael, the ultimate insult. It was a power play disguised as an olive branch. He was being asked to stand up and perform his role as the quirky, acceptable gay brother, a fun accessory to Greg's perfect, heterosexual life. He was supposed to tell some funny anecdotes, wish the happy couple well, and then fade back into the background. Michael and Alex talked late into the night. This was it. This was their chance. A private coming out would be ignored or dismissed by Greg. A confrontation would be twisted with Greg playing the victim. But a speech at his own wedding, in front of everyone he knew, that was a stage you couldn't run from. Michael agreed to give the speech. And he and Alex began to craft the most carefully worded, elegantly constructed, socially devastating weapon they could imagine. It wouldn't contain a single explicit revelation. It would be a masterpiece of innuendo and plausible deniability, designed to sound like a loving tribute to the uninformed, while simultaneously planting an inescapable truth in the minds of the entire audience. The wedding day was a picture-perfect affair at a sprawling vineyard. The sun was shining, the bride was beautiful, and Greg was in his element, holding court, the king of his own perfect day. Michael watched it all with a calm, serene sense of detachment. He saw Alex, standing beside Greg at the altar, looking handsome and impossibly sad. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowd, a silent acknowledgement of the storm that was about to break. At the reception, Michael was called up to the microphone after the father of the bride and the maid of honor had given their tearful, conventional speeches. A polite, expectant applause rippled through the tent. Greg leaned back in his chair, a smug, proprietary smile on his face, ready to receive his tribute. Michael began, his voice even and warm. "Family is a complicated thing," he started, smiling graciously. "And brotherly love is perhaps the most complicated relationship of all. Greg, my brother, you and I, we haven't always seen eye to eye, but you've taught me so much. You've taught me about strength, about confidence, and you even taught me about love in your own way." He turned his gaze to Alex. "In fact, I learned the most about love by watching you and your best man, Alex. I remember when we were teenagers, Greg, you'd sneak out of the house late at night. My parents thought you were going to see some girl, but I knew better. More often than not, you were just going to Alex's. The two of you were just inseparable, sharing secrets in his basement all night long. The bond you two shared, it was a powerful thing to witness." A few people chuckled. It sounded like a sweet story of male friendship. Greg smiled, nodding along, but Michael saw a flicker of nervousness in Alex's eyes. The first seed was planted. "And Alex," Michael continued, addressing him directly now, "you've been more than a best man to Greg. You've been like a brother to our whole family, like another brother to me. We've all shared so much, haven't we? So many memories." He paused, a nostalgic smile on his face. "That trip to your family's lake cabin a few years back, wow. I don't think any of us will ever forget that weekend, will we, Greg? So many firsts." Michael looked from Alex to Greg, his eyes holding a universe of meaning. To the audience, it was a vague, sentimental reference. To Greg, it was a sudden, cold spike of dread as he remembered that weekend, a weekend Michael had crashed, the weekend Michael and Alex's relationship had secretly begun. Greg's smile tightened, the first crack in his perfect facade. The bride looked at him, a flicker of confusion on her face. Michael then turned to her, his voice softening into its final, devastating crescendo. "And Sarah, you are so incredibly lucky. You're marrying a man who truly understands that love comes in all its forms. A man who isn't afraid of passion and deep, emotional commitment. And I know for a fact that he learned so much of that from the most important and formative relationship in his life, the one with his best man. He raised his glass, looking not at his brother but directly at Alex. The entire room followed his gaze. So I want to propose a toast to my brother Greg and his beautiful new wife. But I also want to give a special thank you to Alex. "Thank you, Alex," he said, his voice imbued with a deep, genuine sincerity, "for taking such good care of my brother's heart all these years, and for taking such good care of mine." He held Alex's gaze for one beat too long, a silent, intimate communication that was visible to everyone. He then smiled, clinked his glass with the maid of honor, and took a sip. The reaction was not an explosion. It was a slow dawning, creeping horror. There was a beat of confused, scattered applause from people who had only heard the surface-level niceness of the words. But then the whispers started. A low murmur spread from table to table as the subtext began to sink in. Did he just say what I think he said? Care of his heart. Wait, the lake house. Greg's face had gone from smug to confused to ashen white with panic, and was now settling on a shade of puce with pure, unadulterated rage. He was staring at Alex, who refused to meet his gaze, instead looking down at his plate, his face a mask of terror and relief. The bride, Sarah, was looking back and forth between her new husband and his best man, her fairy tale smile replaced by a dawning look of suspicion and utter humiliation. The dots were connecting in real time, right there in front of 200 guests. Michael didn't say another word. He didn't have to. He calmly placed the microphone on the table and walked back to his seat, leaving the happy couple to navigate the sudden, toxic minefield he had just laid across their reception. He hadn't outed them with a bullhorn. He had simply held up a mirror, and in the reflection, the entire wedding party could suddenly see the truth that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The perfect, traditional wedding was now forever tainted by a question, a suspicion so profound it would unravel everything. The destruction was quiet, elegant, and absolute. And that right there is the art of public revenge. What makes these acts of vengeance so devastating isn't just the exposure of a secret, it's the venue. It's the choice to turn a private betrayal into a public spectacle. The secrets weren't just revealed. They were put on stage with a spotlight, a microphone, and a captive audience that had come expecting a celebration but got a public execution instead. It's a brutal, and at times deeply satisfying, reminder that secrets have a way of demanding an audience. And the bigger the secret, the bigger and more glorious the explosion. It is the ultimate public airing of dirty laundry, where the entire guest list gets a front row seat to the final, chaotic act. So what about you? What is the most unbelievable drama you have ever personally witnessed at a wedding, a funeral, or some other major public event? Drop your story in the comments below because we'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this descent into delicious chaos, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.